Okay, welcome everybody to I think it's our last virtual school garden club of the school year. This is our May webinar, and we'll be talking about getting your school gardens ready for summer, which is just around the corner. So my name is Dory Cooper, and I'm with the Wild Center. The Wild Center is a nonprofit organization located in Decatur, Georgia. And since 1997, the Wild Center has been providing hands-on environmental education experiences for students throughout the Atlanta area and Decatur. And so we work with over 40 different schools throughout Metro Atlanta where they come to visit us in our gardens, and then we go work with them in their school gardens. So I'm our school programs manager, and I've been doing this work for about 2 years with the Wild Center and several years before that. So the experiences that I can share with you all today come from what I've observed and learned from other schools that we've worked with over the years. But I welcome all of our school garden educators that are here today, and this is a space for you to be able to share what has worked really well for you, share what has not worked well for you, and ask questions about the content that I'll be sharing. So again, please feel free to interrupt at any time. So today we are talking all about, our summer break school garden checklist. And I'm excited to dive into this topic because I think there's a lot of myths and also concerns around summer when it comes to school gardening. So we'll kind of talk through a few main things today. I'll go through a few of my recommendations of just what you should physically do to your garden before summer break, or what I recommend. And then also some ideas for maintenance plans over the summer, and then open that up for ideas, questions, and concerns. So school gardens are a joy and a challenge because for most places in the United States, they thrive in the summer when students are not there to enjoy them. We can do as much as we can to plant in the spring and plant in the fall, but it really is kind of a race against the clock to get things growing while the students are there to enjoy them. And so that being said, it can be kind of frustrating for folks because you're planting things with students in April or May, and then when they come back in the fall, everything is dead, or it's time to plant something else, and then it never really comes to fruition before they're back for winter break. So a lot of the time I hear kind of two things from school gardens when it comes down to summer. For example, I just had one school reach out to me a few weeks ago and say, actually, we're just going to close our garden since no one will be this spring, since no one will be able to take care of it in the summer. And then I also hear people say, I don't want to come water every day in the summer, so I don't want to plant anything in the garden. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of myths about gardening, or something that, is hard for me to see, is that folks are hesitant to plant anything in the springtime with their students because they think it will just die. And I'll show you in a moment that although it's absolutely best to be able to maintain and care for our gardens so that we can enjoy them in the fall, it's really surprising how well gardens can thrive with zero human maintenance. I'll show you a few pictures and talk through it. But so my very first recommendation of what to do for your school garden over the summer is to plant things in it. The worst thing you can do for the health of your garden soil is to keep it bare over the summer, because the heat will evaporate all of the moisture out. It will, erosion and rain will wash away a lot of the nutrients, and there's nothing in there to add that organic matter back into the soil and cycle those nutrients. So leaving your garden completely bare really for any season, but especially the hot summer, can really kind of make it more difficult to plant again in the fall or next spring. So it can damage the soil, or not damage, but reduce the health of the soil. And then also it becomes full of plants that you don't want in there, like weeds, that then make it more difficult in the fall. Not all the time. Sometimes in the summertime, those garden beds are just totally bare. And when you come back in the fall, it's like a sandbox. But I always recommend planting something in your garden over the summer, even if you know you're not going to be there to take care of it. So these are some of the things that I like to plant in the summer. This is a little bit of trial and error, but typically I recommend planting things that are very self-sustaining or don't require pruning or harvesting, or that don't grow on trellises. So sweet potatoes is a really great one, because you plant those sweet potatoes and they grow under the soil, and the bed gets covered with leaves and flowers that keep the soil healthy and attract pollinators, and you literally do not have to do anything until it's time to harvest them. You might need to cut back the leaves a little bit because they do get out of hand. But that's a great one if you know that no one is going to be around, no one is going to do anything. Sweet potatoes are great. There's also plants like collards, okra, corn, basil, that they don't need any trellising. You can just plant them and they won't, unlike sweet potatoes, they won't totally grow over the sides of the garden beds. So they're pretty self-sustaining. Peppers and eggplants are good too, because they're smaller and they love the heat. And so they'll do well when it gets really hot. They won't require much maintenance either. And then there's the more fun plants like watermelon, tomatoes, pumpkins, squash, flowers like zinnia, marigold, sunflowers. These will be really exciting when students come back to school and they see a watermelon, or they see a big pumpkin, or beautiful, colorful flowers. So these are fun to have in your garden over the summer. I wish I put it closer. I might zoom ahead. I'm going to zoom ahead towards the end of this so that you can see what I'm talking about with. I shouldn't have put it at the back. Sorry, you're getting a sneak peek. Oh. Maybe I didn't put that picture in here at all. I have a photo from, oh, here it is. So this is a picture of one of our school gardens. This is Westchester Elementary School, where we planted with students in probably April or maybe May. And then nobody did anything at all over the summer. Nobody watered, nobody harvested, nobody showed up. And when I came back on the first day of school, this is what it looked like. So although it is fairly overgrown, you can see that even with just rain and no watering, the plants absolutely still grew. The flowers look beautiful. They had 3 big pumpkins. You can see the vines are pretty dried out, which, isn't ideal, but it was still able to produce some really great fruits to show off. The herbs did a great job. They really thrived. There are some weeds within here, but overall, it still looks pretty good. And so I just want to show that just because nobody will be there to water does not mean the plants will all die, that you can still get some really nice gardens. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts on planting those beds? So please plant your gardens, even if you won't be there. It's best for the health of the garden, and you will be surprised what will make it to the next school year. Okay, so after you've planted Especially in the summer, I recommend, if you can, adding compost to the garden. So I usually like to add about 1 to 2 inches of compost just on top of the soil after I've planted. If you're planting seeds, you can put it down first and then plant the seeds in it. But if you're planting transplants, just put the compost all around. This will do a few things. This will add nutrients back to the soil, add organic matter to help with the health of the soil, but then it also adds a layer of insulation to keep the soil cooler and to keep moisture in. And so that's going to be key when you're not there for weeks at a time, because that's how those gardens are able to survive with just rain. That insulation prevents the sun and the heat from evaporating water out, so it allows it to stay in there a little bit longer. So I always recommend adding a layer of compost, and I know not every school has access to that. If you haven't already, the folks we usually recommend are Compost Now. They can often, you can sign up to be a partner with them, and they can send schools bags of compost. But even if you can just only add this to 1 or 2 beds, if you have some budget to be able to purchase some compost, that's a great option. Another thing that I like to do in addition to or instead of adding compost is what we call mulching. So my favorite type of mulch to use in the garden is dried leaves. But mulching refers to putting some kind of organic matter on top of the bed in order to do the same things I just mentioned with compost. So in order to keep it cool, to keep the temperature down and keep the moisture in and add organic matter and nutrients into the soil. A lot of times folks hear this as mulch and think that's referring to wood chips that we might use as like landscaping mulch. I prefer to use something that breaks down a little bit better, like leaves or straw. Sometimes different wood chips can have high acidity levels or kind of disrupt the soil. And you can look into that and kind of learn about what's best for your garden, but I prefer to keep it safe and just use leaves. I also often we have piles of leaves at the Wild Center, or I just grab them from the tree lines at schools and put them on top of the garden. So after I've planted the plants, I add compost if I have it, and then I add a nice thick layer of leaves and then give it a good water to kind of keep everything in place. And so those leaves will help to keep it cool and keep the moisture in over the summer as well. And then lastly, this step is something that is helpful to do before you leave for the summer. And that's adding structures and signage. So the structures are something that if you have access to them, I definitely recommend putting in while the plants are still small, because before you know it, especially if you're gone for weeks at a time, before you know it, those plants, especially tomatoes, will be taking over, falling over, just a mess. So if you are planting anything that vines, like cucumbers or beans, whole beans, peas, if you're going to plant tomatoes, sometimes peppers, tomatillos, it's a good idea to put in your structures while they're still small. And then you don't have to deal with them as much when they get larger. So it's just a little easier to maintain. This is something that I know, again, a lot of schools don't have access to things like tomato cages or trellises. We like to use bamboo at the Wild Center a lot. I've also personally used sticks and just kind of done what I can to give some structure to the plants. And so, that's also something that you consider when you are picking out your plants is if you don't have structures and you don't think you'll be able to create some, then maybe things like tomatoes and cucumbers are not a good thing to put in your garden this summer. Maybe you can plan for that for next summer. And instead you can do more of those corn, okra, squash, Peppers are usually okay without a structure. They tend to be smaller plants. Same with eggplant. They can do okay without structures. So that's something to think about. And then with signage, I think that signage is really important in the summertime because we've seen this a lot with our school partners, is that folks don't know that the gardens are being used over the summer. So by having signs, it might be a little more obvious that, oh, we've planted corn in the garden and here's our corn sign, and it makes it look more intentional. A lot of our schools have had issues where they plant something for the summer and they come back a few weeks later and facilities and maintenance has just landscaped them completely out because they assumed that it wasn't being used over the summer. So I think signage is a way to help with that. It's also helpful if you're going to, when we talk about maintenance plans in a moment, if you're going to have volunteers support the garden over the summer, it's helpful for them to know what's planted so they know what to harvest, or they can report back how plants are doing. And so signage is just helpful for that. This is actually a type of signage that we've been doing a lot at the Wild Center. This is just a laminated piece of paper attached to a paint stirrer or a small stick. And even though laminated paper is not going to last too many seasons, it should last one season and it should be good enough. We've also painted paint stirrers, so you can get creative with what those garden signs look like. But we like to do the piece of paper with a binder clip on a paint stirrer. You can also think about adding signs that say something a little more specific about your summer maintenance. Maybe something like, we're caring for these over the summer so we can enjoy them in the fall with students, or students are maintaining these plants over the summer, or please don't harvest, students will use these in the fall. Because we have also had schools where other people who are not associated with the school garden are harvesting from the school garden. And I like to assume that they are just assuming that because it's summer, nobody's using it. So you can think about that too if you need to include anything more specific as your signage in there. So those were my 4 steps of any gardening tasks to do before the summer. Does anybody have questions about that or anything else to add that I may have missed? This really is the same or similar process to what we do with any change of the season. You know, these are my same recommendations that I always have of deciding what to plant, adding compost, adding leaves, updating signage, and making sure that you've got the structures that you need. Okay. Great. So now we'll move into the maintenance plan portion. So, of course, you can plant as much as you want in the springtime, and you can follow my what I've seen happen a lot, where you can plant it, no one can touch it, and then you come back and you just hope for the best. And that's absolutely better than not planting anything at all. But if you want to have it be a little bit more organized and less of a surprise when you get back from school, I have a few suggestions on maintenance plans that I've learned from other schools. And so, just like with everything, every single school community is different. Some of you may have groups of staff and volunteers who are really passionate about supporting you in the garden. Some of you may have a neighbor who's willing to water the garden every day over the summer. And some of you, it may just be one of you and you're like, I don't want to go back to school one day over the summer to look at the garden. And so I'll share a few different options of just what I've seen to be successful, but then definitely open it up for ideas of what you think could be successful or what you've done or heard in the past. So again, this was the garden that we came back to. Oh, yes, this is important. Before I get into the maintenance, something that is very important, just like with the signage, I think it's a good idea to let someone at the school know, whoever that might be, whether that's the principal, the facilities manager, let them know that you did plant in the garden and either you plan on setting up a maintenance plan over the summer or that you are going to return and use the garden. That's a good idea to hopefully prevent them tearing things down that you don't want to be torn down in the garden. But then also they might be able to help you with things like access to the building, access to water. It's a good idea to let them know what your maintenance plan is, or at the very least that you have something in the garden you want to keep. So when it comes to maintenance over the summer, I think it sounds like it could be harder than it is necessarily. The main things that really just need to be done over the summer are consistent watering. So I would say with a school garden, at least once a week would be wonderful. If folks want to come multiple times a week, even better. I don't think every day is necessary. But if you have a group of folks that are willing to come every day, amazing. But I think a few times a week, once a week is spectacular. And so watering, just keeping that soil feeling wet to the touch. If it rains, of course, adjusting your watering schedule. When it comes to weeding over the summer, you just want to try to keep plants out of the way that are competing with the vegetables that you've planted, and also keeping it just kind of under control so that when you come back to the school year, it's not covered in weeds. So you don't have to go crazy with that, and not everybody would need to weed necessarily, or you don't have to weed every week, but just trying to keep it under control a little bit. I do recommend cutting off or pruning leaves when they start to turn yellow, because that will keep the plant healthy so that it can keep producing throughout the summer. So I think that's almost more important than weeding. So if you can water and you can cut off any yellow or brown leaves on plants, you'll be in great shape. It's also a good idea to harvest throughout the summer, and that will just keep plants able to keep producing. If we just leave things on the vine, like if we leave a zucchini until it's the size of a baseball bat, that just kind of limits the production that that plant will continue to have. So when you can, harvesting, and then moving any vines back into the bed. So something like a pumpkin, a winter squash, a cucumber, sweet potatoes, they'll probably start to stretch out over the bed of the garden. And so either trimming them or tossing them back into the garden, picking them up and physically putting them back in the garden will just help maintenance better know where they should mow, where they should weed whack without damaging your plants or getting confused. So just to keep things a little bit cleaner out there. I saw that Margie, oh, this was just to me. Margie's volunteering to help at one of our school gardens. I'll help you with that, Margie. Thanks for letting me know. So yeah, so maintenance doesn't need to be super labor intense over the summer. It's hot out there. You know, everyone has things going on. So just popping by and doing a few of these tasks would be huge for the gardens. So the big question is, you know, well, who's going to do the maintenance? If you planted the garden, like I said, you might not want anything to do with it over the summer, which I totally respect. But you might be surprised that somebody else might be willing to come by. So what I would recommend is sending an email to all staff, maybe having the PTA send out an email, just asking if anyone is interested in signing up to help with the garden. And the way that I would organize this, you can do it however, you think works best for your group. But I would create a schedule, just breaking the summer into weeks. And first, just trying to get anyone to sign up for once a week. So whether that's a staff member, a family member, or a community volunteer, maybe somebody that's reached out to you. If you can get someone to sign up for once a week, that's huge. And then you can also bribe them with some produce that they can take anything that's harvestable during that time, maybe. I would also think about and recommend asking about access to the building. So some school gardens you can access without needing to go through the building. Some of our school gardens are in a courtyard and you have to have access with a key code or be there when somebody's a key card or be there when somebody's at the front desk. So figuring out what that schedule looks like over the summer, when, how, and who can access the garden so that you're able to communicate that information to volunteers. And then I would also recommend just having a very brief training meeting with these volunteers. Maybe that's a phone call, maybe that's a Zoom call, maybe you're all able to meet at the school garden at some point. But I've learned that when giving people instructions in the garden, sometimes they interpret that differently. So if you ask a family to water the garden, on a specific day, watering to them may mean something very different. You'd be surprised. So I would just kind of go over with your team of volunteers what watering looks like, where the hose is, how to use the hose, how to use a watering can, what plants you have growing, where the tools are, anything that you can think of that would make it easy for them to know exactly what to do and just show up, take care of the garden, and go home and not be too stressed about it. This also could look like you recording a video of yourself in the garden, showing them where these things are and sending them out, or using photos. But getting that information, I think, will help. So that's my recommendations on kind of a maintenance plan. I know that everyone does this a little bit differently, so I'd love to hear if you have any ideas or things that you've heard or questions you have about this. And again, feel free to type in the chat as well. Honestly, this is one of my favorite things with school gardens is when we plant in the spring and then cross our fingers and get to come back in the fall and see what made it and what didn't. Sometimes it can be a little bit sad when things don't make it, but it also can be amazing how resilient the plants are. Okay. Well, let me go to my contact page here. If questions come up as you're going through this process, please feel free to send me an email. I also love seeing pictures. I'm happy to answer quick questions if you have something, or if you've had an epiphany on how you'll take care of your garden this year. I'd love to hear it. So you can email me at dory@wildcenter.org. And then we'll see you all next school year with our new round of webinars. If you have ideas of things that you'd like us to discuss in a webinar, please, again, send them to me through email, and I'd love to be able to provide for the questions that you have. All right, thank you, everybody.